Typhoon Meranti, one of the most powerful typhoons in history, made landfall in China in 2016, causing severe damage to coastal areas. With winds of up to 305 km/h, Meranti brought torrential rains and ferocious winds, destroying everything in its path. Coastal provinces such as Fujian and Guangdong were hardest hit as Meranti swept through with strong winds and torrential rain. The winds of Typhoon Meranti were so strong that they not only tore off roofs but also uprooted old trees, swept away signs and large objects on the streets. The wind howled in gusts, creating eerie sounds like the screams of nature. The raging winds swept away everything in their path, turning residential areas into scenes of devastation. Electric poles and traffic lights were bent and broken, causing widespread power outages. Windows and doors of many houses were blown out, creating large holes that allowed rain and wind to rush in, causing further damage to people's property. The rainstorm Meranti was not just a shower, but a torrential downpour that continued, as if the whole sky was pouring water onto the ground. The heavy rainfall in a short period of time caused the water level to rise, causing widespread flooding. The rainwater flooded the roads, turning them into raging rivers. The drainage systems were overloaded and clogged, preventing the floodwaters from draining away quickly. Many residential areas were submerged, with people's homes and properties submerged in water, causing great material damage. Low-lying areas were heavily flooded, and many villages and towns were completely isolated by the floodwaters. The rain from Typhoon Meranti poured down in torrents, lasting for days. Heavy rain poured down on the upstream areas, creating powerful and dangerous floodwaters. The sound of rain falling continuously and heavily on roofs, roads, and trees created a noisy sound like a never-ending music of nature. Rainwater from the mountains and forests upstream quickly poured into rivers and streams, causing the water level to rise suddenly. These streams carried mud, branches, and rubbish, forming murky, swirling floods. The floodwaters from upstream poured down with terrible force, sweeping away everything in their path. Trees were uprooted, houses were washed away, roads were eroded by floodwaters, turning into deep holes and cracks. The floodwaters rose rapidly and spread throughout low-lying areas. Rivers and streams became full and overflowed, turning fields and residential areas into vast seas. Villages and towns were completely isolated by floodwaters. Transportation was paralyzed, and many areas became inaccessible. In Fujian, thousands of houses were destroyed. Many roofs were ripped off. Windows were shattered and walls collapsed. Streets were flooded. The transportation system was paralyzed. Many roads were washed away or severely damaged. Floodwaters rose, inundating many areas, submerging villages and residential areas. Landslides occurred in many places, causing serious damage to property and infrastructure. In Guangdong, the economic losses caused by Typhoon Meranti were enormous. Industrial and agricultural areas were severely damaged, and many factories and workshops had to temporarily suspend operations due to infrastructure damage and widespread power outages. Power and telecommunication systems were destroyed, causing widespread power outages and communication disruptions. Many areas were cut off for days, making rescue and recovery difficult. People's daily lives were completely disrupted. Many families lost their homes and belongings and had to take temporary shelter at rescue stations or relatives' homes. Schools, hospitals, and other important infrastructure were severely damaged, disrupting education and medical care. Typhoon Meranti brought heavy rains that lasted for many days, creating a terrifying scene in coastal provinces of China. Many houses had their roofs blown off, revealing the devastation inside. Vehicles were swept away by floodwaters, drifting along the raging water, disappearing without a trace. Busy roads were now heavily damaged, with large cracks appearing due to subsidence. These cracks were like deep wounds on the surface, creating a truly terrifying scene. People had to evacuate urgently, leaving behind their homes and properties destroyed by the relentless force of nature. The storm not only devastated infrastructure, but also left people with great trauma and challenges in overcoming and rebuilding their lives. The rescue work was urgently deployed with the first goal of bringing people to safety, especially the elderly and children. Rescue boats weaved through the floodwaters, not minding the strong and dangerous currents, to reach the flooded houses. The rescuers, with tense and determined faces, used all their strength to bring the trapped people, especially the elderly and children, onto the boats safely. The cries of children, the calls of adults, and the sound of the rushing floodwaters created a chaotic but hopeful scene. The trapped people were taken by the rescue team to temporary shelters, where food, water, and medicine were available. The rescue boats moved back and forth, carrying families who had just escaped danger, only to quickly return to help more people. In those tense moments, solidarity and humanity became clearer than ever. Rescuers and volunteers worked tirelessly, despite the fatigue and danger, to ensure that no one was left behind. The emergency rescue efforts brought comfort and hope to those affected by the storm in a difficult and tragic time. Typhoon Meranti not only caused damage on land, but also seriously affected the sea. Giant waves, tens of meters high, crashed into the shore with a thunderous roar, creating a scene that was both majestic and terrifying. Boats could not go out to sea and were forced to anchor at the port to avoid being sunk by the big waves. Small boats were pushed, collided with each other, damaged and sunk in the murky seawater. The seafood industry was severely affected when fishing activities were completely halted. Fishermen had to sit silently and watch the storm sweep away their livelihood. Many coastal aquaculture facilities were destroyed, causing a serious decline in seafood production. The port became deserted and desolate, no longer bustling with boats full of fresh fish. When Typhoon Meranti passed, the aftermath was devastating. Homes were flooded, with floodwaters damaging furniture and turning once cozy rooms into wet ruins. Trees were uprooted and toppled, blocking traffic and making cleanup more difficult. The ground was covered in mud, trash, and debris, creating a serious sanitation problem. The problem of disease has become a serious concern, especially for people living in heavily flooded areas who face a high risk of contracting water-related diseases such as diarrhea and infections. Despite the devastation, people have been working together to clean up and restore their lives. Authorities at all levels quickly stepped in, organizing cleanup teams, distributing food and clean water, and providing essential supplies to affected families. They have worked tirelessly to restore infrastructure, dispose of waste, and clean up flooded areas, helping people to quickly stabilize their lives. The joint efforts of the community and authorities during these difficult hours have not only helped restore order and cleanliness to the storm-ravaged area, but also demonstrated the power of solidarity and mutual support in challenging times.